They've got to come up with policies that everybody has to follow. We can, because of our size, we can do a little bit more experimentation. Well, should we do this? Should we not do that? It's not. We don't have any hard. We don't really have hard and fast rules.
And I don't think a lot of organizations do, other than it's really it gets back to the kind of they're going to have stuff like that. And I think that students is something they're really interested in, and it's because of questions we got that we came up with this topic.
Some of the best discussions come from questions. I know I speak to Mark Whitman's writing classes every semester, and I've done it for years, and I've shortened the amount of time I was involved in because I want the questions. They prompt better discussions.
And this is a release form. You see, you're here.
Okay.
Because it's going to be live streamed.
Oh goodness! I didn't realize I would put on makeup if I'd done that.
And your swag.
Okay.
Being a UT grad,
Absolutely.
Oh goodness! This is the
18.
18th. Couldn't remember if it was the 18th or the 19th.
Okay. Well, hello. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to our panel and to Social Media Week here at the University of Tennessee. Using social media as news content, that's our topic today. As I like to call it, is Twitter now the most powerful assignment editor in the country? And how is social media actually changing the way we consume news, but also the way we produce news? Luckily, we have some great panelists here with us today to talk about that, drawing from their experience in both print and broadcast journalism. I'm going to start with Tonya Burke. She's the digital director of WBIR Channel 10 here in Knoxville, and she's overseeing the digital platforms. She also manages the Channel 10 internship program, so I guess that is an interesting detail for some of you in the audience who are considering maybe an internship. She has a long years background in broadcast news, so she's her news producer's background is what she told me before we started that she heavily relies upon in her digital position currently at Channel 10. Next to her, Scott Barker, who is a publisher of the subscription-based digital publication called The Compass here in Knoxville. Great source of news for a local government and just being informed what's going on in the here in Knoxville. And long years of experience in Knoxville News Sentinel prior to starting the Compass. And to my left is Joel Christopher, who is the executive editor of the Knoxville News Sentinel. He has a more than 30 years long journalistic career.
Well, less than that.
Okay, well that's what it says in my bio here that I have. And he's overseeing the strategy and execution of news content, audience engagement, and staff development for the Knoxville News Sentinel, part of the USA Today network. So thank you all for being here with us. And please join me in welcoming our speakers today. So let's just start right on topic. How do we as journalists use social media? How do you guys do it? Do we overuse it maybe? Maybe not. Is really Twitter or Google Analytics, for that matter, the most powerful decision maker in our newsrooms today, or is it still us, the traditional gatekeepers? I don't know. Who wants to start?
Sure, why not? Hi, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out. I hope this is a good and valuable discussion for everybody. I think those are some important questions that you just posed about whether social media is one of the more powerful assignment editors now. And I think certainly there can be a case for that in certain circumstances. There's no question that all of our news organizations rely a great deal on seeing what's in the conversation around the news, and that helps us inform and decide on what we're going to cover. On the other hand, I think that as social media has matured and our use of it has matured as well, we've learned a lot from some of the mistakes that we made early on in incorporating that into our news coverage and our news coverage decisions. So in that sense, I think that it's probably past peak in some sense in driving us, at least in urgent situations, for sure. So I think, I see some familiar faces here. We had a conversation yesterday that touched on this, that you look at situations like Kobe Bryant's death recently, for instance, and some of the reporting or not reporting that came out of that on social media. And what was remarkable to me compared to past situations that were similar was how much major media organizations, reputable news organizations, slowed down instead of speeding up in that situation. And I think there was a recognition there that in the past, at times, we've let that social media whirlwind catch us and take us off of spaces that we should be as ethical and reputable news organizations.
Well, I mean, for us, I think that that's the way people communicate now. Oh. Looks like.
Okay, well, maybe if I just pop it up and you guys share it between yourselves so we can
All right.
hear you better. Thanks.
I'm a behind-the-scenes person, so I'm not good at this. I think that the biggest thing about social media now is that is how everybody communicates. And now we get, the first we hear of things is on social media, and it's not just from you. It's from the police department. It's from the university. It's from the Knox County schools. They put that information out on Twitter before, whereas they used to send us an email or call us. That's how we find out Knox County Schools is closed. That's how we find out UT is closed, which never happens, I know. But that's how we would find out first, which is kind of scary, I think, because, you know, we all know how easily it really is to hack it into accounts. So I think there is a little bit of a hesitancy, and it was hard for us at first to accept that, especially with the school closing, which is such an important thing. And if some smart kid managed to hack into the superintendent's account and close schools, and then we amplified it, then that's a big issue for us and our credibility. So, but I mean, I don't think we have a choice now. I think we have to use Twitter as a source, and that's where we get a lot of stuff. That's where the police department's posting photos up on Twitter of the crime scene before we get there. So I think we kind of have to use social media.
Absolutely. And one of the things, we use social media a little bit differently. And one of the reasons is we don't continually update our website. We are subscription-based, so it's only subscribers who get it. And we don't continually update it. So if we see something this morning, in fact, I saw on social media this morning there was a person struck and killed by a car on Chapman Highway this morning. Saw on social media, person identified said victim, who happened to be somebody I know. You know, even if we reported things on a continual basis, we wouldn't report that because that's not an official source. But it could turn out to be somebody completely different. We don't know. That goes back to the Kobe Bryant episode. We tend to look at social media as more of a source of tips than anything else, maybe story ideas, not necessarily a source for information, although we will do that from time to time. You know, primarily we'll go to you know, to social media and find out. You know, it's kind of keeping the pulse of the community, what's going on, what some people in various neighborhoods are thinking about issues that are going on, things like that, and that will prompt stories. And but as far as being an assignment editor, we don't look at it that way. In fact, we're probably the most old school on that, even though we're the youngest media outlet, because you know, we sit back and decide, okay, this is, you know, something that our subscriber base would want to read, and this other thing is not. And so we, even though it might be generating some buzz on social media.
Well, you all mentioned kind of this rule, better be right than first. But, you know, having said that, as you have said, it is unavoidable to kind of trying to be there and to be engaging with social media as a news source. So is there a formal policy that kind of have set up in place in your newsrooms, especially for Channel 10 and News Sentinel would be probably my question goes to them first. Is there a set of rules that you train your new producers, new editors, new reporters on how do they use and where is the silver lining to use social media as a story idea generator or, you know, just getting cues and hints about what's going on in the community, but where is the silver lining in terms of authenticity, in terms of collaborating with sources? Is there a formal policy in place, or how do you guys handle it?
Yeah, well, we don't have like probably a written set of rules, but everything has to be corroborated. If it's an official source and we know it's an official source, we would probably go with that. But if it's like you were saying, somebody named a name, that's, you know, you would have to go to the next level and try to find out that from an official source. Now you may use social media to find out more about that person because it's out there now, and that's where you may find family members or friends or more about this person to make the story more about the person that something happened to, as opposed to how something bad happened to them. Who was this person before this happened to them? Which is something we always try to do. We try to make the story more about people and less about horrible things that go on in the community. But it definitely is a place where you can start digging on things, but it's definitely not something you just go straight with on air or online.
We do have a written policy. I brought it with me actually because I figured this would come up. So we've actually got 12 pages in our USA Today Network Principles of Ethical Conduct for Newsrooms. We like to say that there are some specifics in there about verification, for instance, that we're never going to use a Twitter account as a sole source or necessarily even as a source without having corroborated that that's actually an accurate tweet. I mean, we all know there's a risk of accounts being hacked. You certainly know that in cases where there's organizational accounts or celebrity accounts that you don't necessarily know who's behind that account. So we're going to attribute any kind of quote that comes out of a tweet like that to the account, not necessarily to a specific individual. I think that's an important distinction. We also have to make sure that we've verified that what's coming out of that account legitimately originated with that account. Beyond that, you know, we've got 12 pages worth of ethical conduct for newsrooms that address all kinds of different issues of sourcing. Some of them are not tailored specifically to social media, but the concepts apply. You know, so trying to think of some of the complications that you might get into there. You've got to understand, for instance, that not everyone has familiarity with media the way that sophisticated users like you do or people in newsrooms do. So you got to take that into account when you're thinking about the fact that somebody may use social media that doesn't understand, even though this seems completely obvious to us, that they're broadcasting to the world. And make sure that you're not inappropriately using social media posts by people who don't understand the position that they're putting themselves in. You know, particularly when you're talking about minors, for sure. And there's lots of other situations where you'd want to really consider that before you went straight to publication. Also, really quick, the seriousness of the topic makes a difference too, right? I mean, if it's after a Vols game and you're just putting together, you know, you're aggregating tweets about reaction to a game, that's a little bit different, obviously, than when you're dealing with a serious news story, for sure.
Yeah, I want to hear Scott's remarks, and kind of you started giving advice, which I think is a very valuable insight for our audience of aspiring reporters. of how to use and how not to use social media. And I'd like to hear from you too.
Well, there are only two of us in our newsrooms. We don't. We tend to take a lot of things on a case-by-case basis. Although we both have been in journalism a long time, and we have a good grounding in ethics. I followed the ethics policy that Jill just laid out for 20 years. Some of the things we do, I can echo a little bit of that, but a lot of times what we will do is if somebody posts something, especially on Facebook, we'll private message them or email them if we know their email account and say, give us a call. Let's talk about this some more and get more information. That's what I meant when I said we use it as a source of tips. If somebody tweets something, and although we don't really, we're not big on following Twitter as much as we are on Facebook, but somebody posts something on Facebook that we're interested in, we'll contact them, and instead of quoting their post, we'll quote from an interview with them. And we're a little bit less forgiving, I think, than the News Sentinel on people posting online, although we're not mean by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, one of the things that about social media, and don't have to tell anybody in this room, I hope, that whatever you say out there is public and it is fair game. It doesn't mean we're going to use it, but it is fair game. And we take that usually on a case-by-case basis. And we try, if somebody posts something that, especially if it's a private citizen who's not a public figure, if they post something that might be libelous, we're not going to use that. We might contact them and try to get more information out of them on what they're saying, because they might have a real beef, but it's not, they can express it in a way that's not libelous. And but we're certainly not going to take advantage of people who aren't as familiar with public dissemination of information as we are.
Thank you. We already talked about using social media as a source for story ideas. Let's talk a little bit more about how do you use social media, if you do, as a source of public opinion, instead of the old days when, and we still do, kind of go out, talk to people on the street and kind of solicit their opinions about important matters. Now it seems more often that we see tweets being quoted on the TV screen or in the newspaper publication. And there is, of course, issues of authenticity, of, who is the real person behind that account, as you all talk. So how do you use social media as a replacement, or do you, of public opinion and a tool for public opinion measurement?
Well, one of the things that we do, and we did this actually this morning, our subscribers also get a daily newsletter that has more stuff than is on our website. And we had a piece in our newsletter this morning about a bill in the state legislature that a lot of people on social media reacted to and vehemently opposed, and we noted that in our newsletter. We didn't try to quantify it, and I think that you're getting a real dangerous waters if you try to quantify it. The posts that we saw were almost universally condemning this bill, but that doesn't. That's no substitute for a poll or anything else like that. So you've got to be very careful about how you present that information. We also and that goes to a lot of things. There are a lot of I'm sure you see them all the time. I do. Best places to raise your children, worst places to open a business and things like that. A lot of those are done by websites, very unscientific and very, we try to stay away from those as much as possible, although it's almost impossible to completely ignore them. We also do, every month we team with an organization out of Nashville to do a poll of a select poll of people in the Knoxville area, although it's not a scientific poll, but we have to put in there, it's not a scientific poll. It is a poll of a certain demographic of people, and it's basically movers and shakers in Knox County, and they can be very wrong compared to the rest of the population. For example, they in that particular poll, they all thought that Phil Bredesen was going to win the Senate race 2 years ago, and he did not. And so, so you have to be very careful on how you present the information that you get, and you can never substitute even overwhelming social media opinion for a scientific poll, for example.
We actually have a brand called 10 Listens that's sort of based upon that. People will, they may send us a question directly about something they've seen. Is this really happening? I've seen this all over social media. Is this a real thing? And we take those comments and we brand it as 10 Listens, and we answer those questions as best we can. And we invite those questions. We'll post we do a story at 6 o'clock, and we'll post it on our Facebook page, and it'll start a conversation. And then at 11 o'clock, we'll have mined those questions and maybe pick the top 5 questions that people have asked, and then we'll try to clear those up, both on the 11 o'clock newscast and in its own story on our website. So I think you do have to kind of take into account the public opinion on those things, but sometimes public opinion's kind of crazy. So you can't always take it seriously. But I think it definitely gives you a real pulse of the community. We can predict exactly how things are going to go on our Facebook page, depending on the subject matter. We almost always know exactly what's going to happen. Carson knows. When you post something of a certain topic on social media, you know exactly what's going to happen, and you just have to be prepared for that, because it's just the way people communicate these days.
I think you both bring up some good points. One thing, inevitably, critics have a bigger, louder voice on social media than proponents. I mean, that's natural in life too, right? You don't see millions of people tweeting about how awesome the Super Bowl halftime show was typically. So you've got to take into account that natural bias that's built in there, that people that don't like tend to be louder than people that like. I think, again, it gets back to the seriousness of the topic a lot of times for us. On things that are light, that don't have a lot of consequence, we're a lot more likely to have fun and incorporate social media into the reporting. On serious topics, the only way we're doing it is with additional verification. Even with accounts where you know who it is and who's behind it, you still got to make sure that you verify, because the one time you don't do it, you're gonna get burned on it.
Those are some excellent points made. Before I open it up for questions, and I'm sure you have a lot of amazing things on your mind, I just want to talk a little bit here about the so-called data-driven journalism, because the other aspect of social media and with this big data available out there is that we can pretty much know with a certain level, with a serious level of certainty, what our audiences want to know. So instead of us kind of gatekeeping and kind of setting the agenda, we now can use Google Analytics or all this kind of software and automations available to us to kind of just serve the people what we already know they want to hear about. So is that changing the way we do our jobs? Is that this overarching powerful new news value of clickability adopted in your newsrooms or in our culture at this point, do you feel?
I mean, we definitely use data to make decisions. We go over what stories did the best on our website yesterday, what's trending on Facebook right now, and all of our editorial meetings. So it's definitely part of the conversation. You can't let it drive everything. I mean, if we let the data drive everything, our entire newscast will be full of stories about cute dogs and Dolly Parton, because those do really well on our website. So
What's wrong with that?
there's nothing wrong with that. We've always said that the biggest story would be Peyton Manning, Dolly Parton adopting a puppy together or something would be, or rescuing a dog from floodwaters or whatever. So we definitely use the data, but you kind of have to filter it a little bit for those things, because there are, things that won't necessarily, they're just cute things that you use for engagement and feel good stories, which are always good.
Well, I'm sandwiched in between data users. I don't know how much it drives at the News Sentinel now, but before I left, it was very heavily data driven. We don't use analytics very much. We have some internal analytics that we look at, but we don't rely on them. One of the reasons is we already have a niche audience. I mean, we unlike WBR and the News Sentinel, they're general audiences. They cover a lot of beats, a lot of areas of interest, and we're very much focused on local government, politics, and education, and a little bit of business thrown in there as well. And so we already, and because we're subscription based, and people are already buying into that type of coverage, and so we don't have to worry about Peyton. I don't know if we've ever. I think we've only mentioned Peyton once or twice. We don't mention. Well, it doesn't do us any good because we're subscription. If he did that, we'd write about him. And your clicks and their clicks and the News Sentinel's clicks would go through the roof. But there's some value in it. I'm sure it's just something that we don't. As long as we focus on our niche, then we are don't have to worry necessarily about the number of clicks. We know the number of clicks we're going to get. The number of clicks are pretty much the number of subscribers. So we focus on increasing the subscription base, of course, but not through really analytics or anything like that.
When you first framed the question, you said data-driven journalism, and I think that there's an important distinction to be made there. We talk about data-informed journalism, so it's a tool. There's no question about it, and it's a powerful tool. And absolutely, we incorporate it into thinking about what topics people are most interested in, most engaged in, where that audience is coming from, and I think it'd be absurd not to. I mean, the biggest change in journalism in the last 15 years has been broadcast has always had some measure of audience that they've used to help determine coverage, and that was an advantage, I think, for a long time that most print-based newsrooms never had. So think of the two worlds. In the old day, you operated by the gut of the people in the newsroom, right? What they you thought was interesting. And now look at what the typical newsroom looked like, and still in a lot of cases still looks like, and then look at what your audience looks like, and tell me whether those two things align and whether they were best serving their audiences based on their guts. I would posit absolutely not, and that's part of the decline you see in the credibility of journalism and the reach of journalism, is that it doesn't speak to great portions of what the audience is. So being able to get real-time and accurate feedback from your audience tells you a lot of things that your room can't tell itself. And there's limits to that, of course, but it's a much bigger voice than you previously had. I feel like I'm repeating myself to the people that I talked to yesterday, but this is an important point. In the old days, we talked about you had to answer to the editors. The editors were a small, select group of people that were physically in the room with you. Now the editors are all of you. Every click, every page view, every second of engagement spent on your site, those aren't metrics, they aren't analytics. Those are human beings telling you what they value. So I get a bit annoyed when we reduce metrics or analytics to numbers. Those are people acting and telling you what they care about, and I think you dismiss that, at your own risk. Now, of course, as journalists, you have to be thoughtful about that, but you can't be dismissive of the message that you're getting from your audience.
A good point and a great discussion here. I just want to add, those are people, but what are the role of algorithms? Because those are people boosted by algorithms who, as we know, privilege the scandalous, the kind of more conflicting topics normally, to the extent that we know anything about those algorithms, which we don't.
When you look at, you take Chartbeat, for instance, which is the largest real-time measurement of news analytics, or Parsley, which is its equivalent. Every year, those companies, at the end of the year, they publish what the top 10 stories, topics were, and they're measuring this across literally thousands and thousands of newsrooms. It's not fluffy stuff. It's not scandal. It's hard, important news that affects people's lives. There are occasionally things that will rise into that level that are more cultural touch points. So I imagine at the end of 2020, Kobe Bryant's death will be in that. But that's not like that's unimportant news, right? That speaks to a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, and it speaks to what our collective consciousness is and cares are. So I wouldn't dismiss a story like that as not being an important story. It's a vastly important story to lots and lots and lots of people. But beyond those kind of stories that rise into that level because of the way they touch so many different lives, the rest of them are typically really hard news stories. And I think that speaks volumes about the smarts and thoughtfulness of audiences, which I think too often, frankly, journalists are dismissive of. And we don't think people can handle or care about news that you have to work for, right? That you have to take some time with. People are absolutely willing to do that. Give them interesting ways into that. No, that's it. Actually, it was perfect timing.
Okay, thank you. Maybe let's just open up for questions. I feel we just kind of segued here into the positive interpretation of social media, which is good, you know, the way we all use it to reach to our audiences, and the big hopes that social media will actually make our media system more democratic, which was, you know, the greatest hope. So maybe talk about that first, or maybe open up for questions. Is there any good questions, any questions in the audience? Because I feel like what's on your mind is what's important as well. Dr. Harmon there.
I'd like to know, especially for the VIR and the general, what are your policies regarding the reporters and news staff, and to require them to do this? And if so, you have rules like no overt, us to link back, is to do blank. So what you tell the reporting staffers about what they can and whether they can have, please take it from there.
We definitely have a social media policy. We do not have a quota, I think, for like every reporter, on-air person, they should have their own public account. They can have a private account as well. They can't assume their private accounts are always private, though. So just those of you who are going on to careers as talent, just even your private account, be very careful with. But we don't have quotas. Some newsrooms do. Some people say you have to post, every reporter has to post 5 posts a day on Twitter and Facebook, and we don't do that. Just because we feel like it should really sort of be driven by the content and by what they're doing that day. So that seems sort of arbitrary to just expect them to have 5 interesting things that the public should know. So that's why we don't have those rules. As far as partisanship, absolutely, we tell people you don't show bias, you don't show political affiliations, you don't show... you have to be very careful to maintain your neutrality in that. An interesting thing, though, that happens when you're following a candidate or a campaign, sometimes you have to like their page to get their information. So that's sometimes a little uncomfortable when it shows up on your page. See, some pages you can follow without liking, but then some you kind of have to like to really see their, depending on how the candidate set it up. So that can be a little iffy sometimes if it looks like you're liking a campaign page. But you kind of have to sometimes if that's where they're posting, especially if they're involved in something that's newsworthy. You have to like their page in order to find out what they're saying. But yeah, we definitely do have a written social media policy. And that goes from the top down. If you're on air or if you're an intern, everyone is held to the same standards on social media as far as not showing a bias of any of their opinions. I'm sure you guys have the same.
Again, because we're just two people, it's don't be stupid on social media is pretty much our thing. But there are interesting things, like you said. You've got to like a page to follow it, and that's when your entire professional career you've basically said I can't like or dislike anything, and then you're told you've got to like something just to find out general information. It's not fun, or it's still disconcerting. Well, that's it. Don't really have much more to add to that.
Yeah, I've mentioned already we have a pretty extensive written conduct for our newsrooms, but when I go through this with every new hire in our newsroom, we go through all 12 pages about it and talk about it extensively, and it's probably really boring for the person on the other end of it. But we get to the social media part, and I say, and it's half kidding, but it's actually completely serious. I can condense our social media policy down to 3 words, which is don't get fired. And when you think about that, that's not actually being facetious, right? You know when you're treading on dangerous territory in social media. If you are ever feeling yourself about to post something in anger because you think you're going to get in a quick hit on something, maybe you've been out and had a few drinks, you got to stop yourself in those situations. So we tell people to slow down. And if you have any sense that you're in territory that you shouldn't be in, just stop. There's nothing that important ever on social media. Run it by somebody else. Talk to an editor, talk to a friend, or don't post it. And you'll never regret any of those decisions. You will regret the decision of doing something without thoughtfulness. So that's my advice to you. Don't get fired.
I want to add one more. Made me think of something. One thing that I do frequently is I go into my word processing program and type out my social media comments or posts or whatever, and just that fact of getting it on paper and then looking at, or not paper, it's on pixels, but but just writing it out where it's not on the platform, and then reading it, and then I can go, wait, I'm being a real jerk here. I don't need to do this, and I found that to be very helpful. It's kept me from making some very embarrassing posts or mistakes.
Yeah, no kidding.
I'll take a mediocre editor on social media. I just need somebody to make sure I don't make a fool out of myself.
Some tricky territory for all of you. You're not into your professional career yet, right? And I know you've all heard the advice of, don't put anything out there that you wouldn't want out there. It's harder than you think it is, and there's some situations that present super challenges for newsrooms, and I'll give you a great example. I spent most of my career actually in Wisconsin, and early like 2010, I guess it was. There was a Republican governor who was elected there, and he stripped collective bargaining from all public unions. This was a big deal. Massive protests, 100,000 people for 6 weeks straight at the state capitol. And that's Madison, that's the University of Wisconsin is there. It's a huge university, 45,000 students. A lot of the protesters were students, right? Fast forward 3 or 4 years, we're starting to make hires, and it turns out some of these people were active and vocal protesters against the governor, right? And we had to make some really tough decisions about whether or not to hire people, what positions they could be hired into, how we would disclose their history publicly. We hired most of them, by the way. But I had, as an editor, I had to spend a lot of time defending those hires in a lot of cases. But, sure, we've got these principles of ethical conduct, but when you're a 19-year-old sophomore who may not even be a journalism student, you didn't make that deal at that point in your life, which is why we were able to, in a lot of cases, justify the hire that we made. But it's a really good real-life example of how you're not bound by rules right now, but there are newsrooms that might retroactively apply those rules to you. And there were newsrooms in our state that didn't hire some of these people. I think they made a big mistake because they're really talented. And in fact, some of them have since gone on to work in those other newsrooms. But I just want you to think about that as well. Things that you may not have even considered maybe governing your professional life right now, even though you're not yet a professional.
Any other questions before you all delete your Facebook accounts? Well, maybe while you're thinking about your questions, let's talk a little bit about user-generated content. And I know it's probably again past the peak time of the way and the amounts of the usage it gets in the newsroom. But how do you use user-generated content at this point of time in your work in newsrooms?
It probably lands on me as much as anybody, I think, by nature of the medium. But you're right. I think there was a huge wave of excitement at one point that this was going to be not the future of journalism, but a big part of the future of journalism. And there's been, that has subsided for a couple of different reasons. In a lot of cases, the quality of it just isn't very good, and people don't consume it. It's massively time-consuming. Sometimes it's more time-consuming than actually producing it yourself. And you get into all kinds of issues that we have to be cognizant as journalists about copyrights, about libel, all sorts of things that average people aren't trained in, which again makes it more time-consuming and increases our liability. And anything we publish obviously reflects back on our credibility. So all of those are factors that really weigh against it. I think that's why you've seen it peak in a lot of cases.
We use it a lot in situations like the flooding and storm situations, because obviously we cover a very wide area and we do not have the staffing to get someone out in every county in East Tennessee and East Tennessee that are part of our coverage area. So we do use UGC a lot for that, but we have to find out who took the picture. We get their permission to use it. Just because they post it on our Facebook page doesn't necessarily mean we can just take it and republish it. We have a graphic that we all have on our laptops that when someone posts something that's really cool, we'll respond, and it basically says, do you give permission for WBIR to use this on this platform, this platform, this platform? And actually that also extends to our parent company, Tegna, because we're all over the country and we spread that stuff all over the country if it's really good. So we use it a lot for that purposes. And we get a lot of really cute bear videos. We use bear videos a lot. Bears in hot tubs, bears locked in cars. Those are fun. So they're kind of hard to track down sometimes, though, because you never know. And people don't understand that they can't share a video with us of a fight at a Wendy's and say, you need to post this video. And it's like, well, who took it? We can't just, because you've shared, it's been shared 3 million times, it doesn't mean we can share it another 3,000,001. What we can do, and we talked a little bit before about public versus private stuff on Twitter. If it's, or on social media in general, if you've posted something on your public account, we can use that content in context. So you can embed, so on our website, in a web story, if it's a public post, we can embed that. So it's still it's your Facebook post, it's still on Facebook, but it's visible on our page. Same thing with a video on YouTube. If you've posted a video on YouTube and it's public, we can post it in the context of a YouTube video. We don't get the clicks for it. It's still getting clicks on YouTube. But that is a really important, I think, distinction. I know some people, well, I didn't give them permission to use my tweet. Well, we don't have to get your permission necessarily. We do try to be fair about it. But we really can use it if we want to. So if you've posted it publicly.
Yeah, because of the size of our publication, we don't really use a whole lot of reader-generated content. None of our stories are reader-generated. The only exception is on Thursdays we have a fun little thing that we do that's a kind of a mystery photo thing called Knox Found, where we'll post a photo and get people to guess where it is. We'll take reader submitted things like that, but it's just a little fun thing. It's not really the journalism content.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience?
If I can jump in real quick,
Sure. Go ahead.
I speak to a journalism class here every semester, and one of the things when it comes to questions from the audience, often the professor will ask, and people will sit there. You're journalism students, for God's sake, ask questions. Thank you. Even if you think they're stupid, ask them.
There is no stupid question.
Stupid answers.
Dr. Swan. Especially for those on-air people, like, whew.
Well, there are a lot of comments we would like to delete on our Facebook page, but we generally, it's a pretty high bar to do that. If it's a personal attack, if someone's coming in and personally threatening someone, that's a situation where we have taken posts or taken comments down or actually blocked a user. There's also sometimes if it's a situation where there's been a tragedy and the people haven't been identified yet, and then in the comment section they're posting names of victims and all this stuff. Sometimes we'll hide those just because no news, people think we do, but no news organization wants to be the way you find out about something horrible that's happened to. We don't want that ever. We get accused of that a lot, but we really don't want to do that. So there have been a few situations like that where we've hidden posts, and then there are obvious trolls that are just going in and inciting off topic or just trying to incite anger and frustration in people. And those people, if it happens repeatedly, they can be blocked and banned. But it's a pretty high bar. People will get really mad at Channel 10 about a lot of things, and we don't delete those. Those stay there. We'd like to sometimes, but I think it's a pretty high bar for us.
Yeah, timing your question is interesting. As a company, we're in the midst of about a 6-month experiment now where we're doing different levels of moderation on comments depending on the newsroom. And coming out of that, we're going to we're going to introduce some different standards than what we have now, which is the Wild West, really. The only thing that we're going to take off of there is something that's clearly untrue or gets into threats, basically. I think news media in general made a big mistake with, well, it wasn't a mistake. That's not fair to say. It was easier to not moderate comments because you actually get into some legal liability if you do inconsistent moderation. It's really almost an all or nothing choice to some extent. If you apply like a really heavy hand sometimes and then you don't moderate at all, you can really open yourself up to libel lawsuits because they can say, well, they did moderate, but they didn't moderate in this case. So what's the difference, right? They failed in their duty to moderate. That's why you don't see a lot of moderation. But I think, every single site has the same cycle that happens if you don't moderate, which is the conversation degenerates, the number of people who participate in it are very small, and they tend to drive away normal users. So, the best solution, it's also the most expensive, is to have a heavily moderated discussion that really is limited to people that you can verify their identities. That's what we are moving to, and we can do that, especially as we move to a subscription-only model. It gets easier to do that. I will make one other point, and I know you know this, Professor, but it's not censorship if we delete your comment. Only the government can censor you. A private company, which we are, cannot. And so we will moderate and delete comments without apology. It's our platform. You don't have a right to be there, although we want people there. But when you're dealing with people who shouldn't be there, they've got no right to be there. We decide who's on our lawn.
Well, we handle that a little differently because we are subscription only. We don't even have comments on our website. But we do have is a closed Facebook group for subscribers, and what our subscribers can go there and ask to be a member of the group, and we check to make sure they're a subscriber, and then they can go ahead and comment. So that filters out a lot, and because of our niche, I mean, our target audience are people in Knoxville and Knox County who are engaged, who are politically active. I dare say that 100% of our readers are voters already, so we don't have to, push voter registration a whole lot because we know they're voters. And because of that, they moderate themselves. We don't get the trolls that which makes me so happy. We've been running about a year and a half. We've had exactly 3 of the comments on our Facebook group flagged. 2 of them were political reasons, and so we didn't do anything. The other was an objection to some mild profanity that a user used. That objection came from my father, and I told him to shut the hell up. No, but I mean, it was we haven't had to delete a single comment. Sometimes, if somebody gets off topic or something, usually it's another reader who will post, "Hey, this is a thread about taxes, and you're talking about the presidential race or something like that." And so we don't have to do a lot of moderating, which with our staff is pretty nice because we don't have time to do it.
Thank you. I see a question there.
Yeah, there's certain ways, and you can't verify. If it's a picture of a puddle in a road, you're not going to worry about verifying that. But there are obviously some pictures that come in that are like, that looks really too good to be true. Could that possibly be? Is that really real? And so there are actually you can reverse image search it. We actually are going through disinformation training right now at the station, where I've gone through the first level of it, and then we're going to present it down to the rest of the newsroom. but about ways that you can look at an image and how you can look at that and detect clues as to whether it's real or not. So there's probably not as much as there should be. It's definitely a part of the conversation because, yeah, you don't want to get burned, and media organizations have had major issues with that, and I don't think we've had one, thank goodness, in the market that I can remember that we've all.
I was just thinking, we almost finished a social media panel on journalism without talking fake news. That's just not right. We have to talk about fake news. And you started, Tanya, about reflecting about potential crisis situation what a lot of media outlets have had in their past because of not fact-checking enough, because of not, being able to identify the so-called deep fakes or just, regular fakes. You said you don't remember having, fallen victim of it. Do you remember any of your cases when you were close to disseminate fake information to your viewers, readers? If it didn't happen, great, but do you remember cases when you were close to almost doing it because of...
I mean, I think with spoof Twitter accounts is when it's the most dangerous because, you can put a Twitter account up. You can use the WBIR logo. You can call it WBIR Channel 10. There's a fake Coach Pruitt. Actually, that one almost did make it. So there was a fake Coach Pruitt and posted about him having his baby girl or whatever, and it was fake. It wasn't real. And somebody posted it. We have an internal Facebook page where we kind of share things we see. And a producer saw that and said, "Oh my gosh, Coach Pruitt's wife had the baby." And then the sports guy was like, No, it's a fake account. So that's probably the biggest danger is those spoof accounts. I remember the Knox County school superintendent one time, there was a fake Twitter account trying to close schools. So those are the things that you have to watch very carefully. The blue check mark is important in a lot of those cases, but they don't give the blue check mark to the Knox County school superintendent, generally. So you just kind of have to watch. There's a lot of fake Great Smoky Mountains accounts that aren't official verified accounts. So you have to be careful when you can't just post the stuff that they post. You have to go to the official Smokies Roads. Or even better, you call the PR person and you double check and say, is this real?
Okay. Any questions from the audience?
I can speak for us. If you look at the breakdown of our audience, it's about equal thirds of direct to the site, through search and through social. So it's a massive driver of audience for us. Absolutely. So it's baked into the entire process from conception of story to publication to promotion and beyond. So yeah, I mean, we're dependent on it. There's no doubt about it from a volume perspective. The downside of that is you can get audience that you don't frankly care about when you're a local news organization like we are, and I guarantee WBIR deals with this. Probably not so much Compass, but particularly around UT Sports, for instance, audience members from out of market are not as valuable to us as audience members in market, and your social audience can be much more far flung in a lot of cases, but absolutely, it's a huge part of what we do.
It used to be even bigger before Facebook changed its algorithm. It used to be 80-90% would come from social media, which is kind of crazy, but and it took us a while. Our traffic dropped when Facebook made that change, and we had to figure out, okay, wait a minute, now we have to reevaluate where we're getting our viewers, and we started focusing more on Google search, and then we started a newsletter, and you'd have to come up with different ways to reach your audience. But Facebook had a lot of power on driving local news organizations, I think, there for a while.
We don't rely on it so much to drive new readers to us. We do, as far as reading a particular story, though we do, we have a public Compass page on Facebook, and we will post our stories there and say you could go there and subscribe. So it's more of a marketing tool. get subscriptions. And you can go to the website and also read some of our content for free. Like, for instance, we got the local election content is free right now for people. And and hopefully people go to the web, and people do go to the website that way and eventually become subscribers. One of the great things about our audience is a lot of times they will post things for us and on their own pages, which is really nice. And so we use Facebook to market subscriptions more than to drive traffic, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Well,
I'll just add something real quick. We don't use social media necessarily to drive people to our newscasts. We found that that doesn't really work. So one important part that we have learned over a lot of years is that you are serving the audience on the platform they choose. So, we don't think that necessarily people are going to be on their Facebook feed and see a tease for something on at 6 p.m. and be like, oh, well, it's 5:59. That doesn't really work. And so you won't see us doing that. What we'll do is what we rely on it is hopefully to build more brand loyalty. If you are a fan of our page and you see consistently good things on our page, and then if something happens that you are interested in, if there's a major snowstorm on the way or a flooding event, then that's when you want to get your immediate information from television. You'll be like, well, I like their Facebook page, so I'm going to find WBIR on television. So it's more of that than a direct driver of for people to watch our newscasts.
and that brings an interesting topic about the digital first newsrooms. Are you a digital first newsroom, meaning when a reporter comes back from an assignment, are they required to post on digital social first, or how does that process go? And I've seen you produce a special content for social designated only to reach people where they are. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, and then I'll go to.
We definitely want to get there. We do view ourselves as a digital first newsroom, and some of it depends on the story. If a reporter's covering a breaking news story all day long, then that story's being updated all day long, where there's no more waiting for 5 or 6 o'clock. Plus, we're competing with the Sentinel, and we're competing with the other TV stations, and we want to make sure we get that news out as quickly as possible. If a reporter's doing a feature story, or it's more of an in-depth investigation or whatever, those probably are not necessarily expected to be posted beforehand. And we try to be realistic, because our reporters are MMJs. They are shooting, writing, editing all their own content. They're working really, really hard. And so I always feel really bad when I'm like, hey, I know you have 2 packages of OSOT and all this stuff, but can you go ahead and write that web story first? I know the show airs in 30 minutes, but you'll be fine. You have to be realistic. And so we do have a digital staff that works with the reporters. Essentially, it's, just have an open line of communication. If you're out on a story, you get a development, email it back, call us back, and we'll get that story updated throughout the day. And that makes your day easier at the end, because the story's already there. So you don't have to go, sit and write down an entire story at 6:30 after your story is aired on the 6 o'clock news.
Yeah, we publish virtually 99.99% of things digitally first. And really, and iteratively too. So, you'll see the story develop as we're adding additional reporting. And I think that's probably been the biggest change that you've seen in the digital revolution, although it's really actually just taking local newsrooms back to the wire service roots. Because that's how wire services have always reported, right? They would start with one line and build the story out and push each version of that. That's what we do now. So if no, they certainly are not.
Okay, there was a question there. Sorry that I kind of.
talking a lot about Facebook and Twitter, but I wondered if platforms where you see some potential there. Obviously, Washington a lot of success with this. So are you kind of expanding into the others?
that's a great question, because we talk social media, and there is different social media networking sites, and they're not necessarily ruled by the same rules.
We've had more success with Instagram, and it's mostly, but it's very different. You know, you use Instagram very differently than you use Facebook. I mean, on Facebook, we're posting every 30 minutes. You know, usually on Instagram, we'll do an Instagram story in the morning, 3 or 4 little what's going on today. We may add to that later in the day if something big is happening, but so Instagram is a lot more, there's a lot more thought put into how we use that platform. Twitter is basically a constant feed throughout the day. We've sort of found that, you know, Facebook is our hugest, is where we get our biggest social interactions from. And then Twitter and Instagram have a little slice of the pie. And then some outlets have found, we haven't found any success with Snapchat. We can't figure out how to use that. If you guys can figure out that, let us know. Or TikTok. We do have some people with TikTok accounts, but we don't really do much TikToking.
Yeah, you know, same with our company. We've got we have social media teams that are on all platforms. It becomes a question of what you're trying to achieve there. So if you're, you know, fundamentally, it's hard for most newsrooms to get out of the idea that you're trying to get people to your content, right? And on platforms like TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram, that's not really the reason for that platform. So it becomes about brand awareness and engagement, and it's most places will default to taking the direct measurable interaction with an audience over the long-term idea of brand building. Now that's, I certainly think there's an argument to be made that that's a mistake, but you're stretched and you have to make choices, and generally you're going to make the choice that brings you the most immediate payoff. That said, though, you know, we're lucky, like WBIR is. In fact, we used to be the same company, but we're lucky to be parts of big companies that are able to devote sections of our company to experimenting in those spaces and then pushing that back out to local newsrooms when it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous, as a matter of fact. We basically stick to Facebook. Part of that is our demographics of our audience, because we're subscription only, because of the content, because we're focused on, you know, local politics and government. You know, our readers tend to skew older, and they're probably a little bit more comfortable on Facebook, and they understand it a little more easily than they understand, you know, TikTok. You know, you say TikTok to somebody my age, and you kind of go, "Why don't you just say clock? It's okay." And you say it to people. You say that, if I say that to you, people, students' age, they don't understand the connection between the words TikTok and clock, because they've never been around one, or very few.
Thank you.
As this young woman looks at her watch, I say that.
Well, we do have like close to 5 more minutes to go. If there are no other question from the audience, I'm just gonna go ahead and sum it up by just posing one last question. We talked a little bit about the good, the bad, not so much about the ugly of social media and the way it's used in journalism. If you have to take a stance, a curse or a blessing, what would that choice be? Is social media good or bad for journalism?
Well, I'm going to have to go back to this. I don't know. It can be a little bit of both. I mean, it's hard to say good or bad. It is what it is. It is part of the society. It's not necessarily. It's not only it's not going to go anywhere, but 10 years from now it's going to be completely different than what it is now. 10 years ago, you know, Snapchat. What the heck are you talking about? And 20 years ago, Twitter was and Facebook were pretty much I seem to recall MySpace, and I was already old for MySpace back then. So I don't think you say it's good or bad necessarily. It's a tool, and you can use tools well, and you can use them badly. And I think that is it's incumbent upon us to figure out the ways to use social media well, and to avoid using it badly.
Well, I will totally agree and say that we actually joke in the newsroom that the best thing about social media is you get instant feedback from your audience. And the worst thing about social media is that you get instant feedback from your audience. So it really can go both ways. And sometimes it is really nice to get that instant gratification of knowing that a story has touched somebody, knowing that an investigation has changed someone's life. But then you also hear immediately when they're mad, or you've made a mistake, or they don't agree with you, or they think you're liberal, or they think you're conservative. So it really goes both ways.
Yeah, I'm just echo that. I mean, it's a tool, and depending on who's using the tool, it's good or bad. So
Thank you. And before I let you all go and tweet about this event, which I encourage you to do, please join. See, we are not doing good on social media side then. Please join me in thanking our speakers here for sharing. Thank you. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Be sure to sign in for my class if you have it. And for mine.
Terrified that I was going to knock that thing down and make the whole room.
Yeah, well, I know, but I was thinking, okay, if that happens once, it'll be bad. But if it happened every time I set it down, which is what I was worried was going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, what's worse, a lot of little ticks or one big
Really
one?
big loud one.
Yeah. And we managed to avoid the big one.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
It was
Thank
fun.
you very much.
I'm talking about my research interest here at the University